If you were to wind the clock back 15 years, then the idea of this G80 BMW M3 would seem mad. I mean, of course, cars evolve, they get quicker and more capable, but this is a BMW M car. There's other stuff that matters. For example, at £75,000, this costs almost twice what an E46 M3 did when it was new. It's also wider than an E60 M5, it's got a turbocharged engine, and while you can't have it with a manual gearbox in the UK, you can have it with all-wheel drive. It's like the original recipe for a BMW M3 has been lost.
For many, this will be a bad thing. They'll say that the latest M3 is more like its AMG and Audi RS rivals than ever, that BMW has lost the plot in both the engineering and styling department, that you may as well get an M2 CS because, well, it's the same price, it's easier to place on the road, you can have it with a manual, and there's not a front drive shaft in sight.
But you know, I disagree with that because from where I'm sitting, this is still a proper M car. Frequent viewers of this channel will remember that a couple of months back we compared the brand new M4 competition against a base 911 Carrera, and in the end I narrowly preferred the Porsche. But I did say at the time that when I drove the M3 I reserved the right to change my mind because, I mean, I just think saloons are cooler than coupes. And also, you've got to consider that with the M3 you're getting a saloon car body, which is more practical, but you're also getting 911 rivaling performance. And I think that's a pretty good combination. The engine in this car is the same S58 unit as BMW uses in its high-performance X3M SUV, but don't let that last bit put you off because it is brilliantly suited to the M3. It's a twin turbocharged 3-litre straight six, and it makes 503 brake horsepower and 479 pounds-foot of torque. That means 0 to 62 miles an hour in 3.9 seconds. And if you go for the X-Drive all-wheel drive version, that drops to 3.5 seconds. Oh, it's properly rapid, this thing. I mean, I reckon you could blindfold someone, put them in the passenger seat of this car, and if they knew anything about cars, they'd probably think they were in an M5, such is the amount of performance BMW have managed to extract out of this engine. It is properly rapid, this thing. And yet it's not just the numbers that are impressive, because there's always something going on right throughout the rev range. I mean, the flexibility that you've got is truly staggering. It gets going from about 2,500 RPM, and the torque just pulls you towards the horizon at a startling rate, to the point that you can do a good twisty road like this one and just, well, leave it in 5th gear, 4th if you want some real punch, but honestly, 5th will get you down here quicker than most cars when they're really been ragged. And yet, crucially, and this is important, unlike a lot of turbocharged engines that are really flexible, there is still a reason to go to the red line in this car. I mean, the sound isn't great by older M car standards, but I don't know, by the modern day standard of engines with all the emissions regulations and turbocharging, I think it's pretty good. It's enough to explore the higher rev ranges, but what also makes you want to go there is the engine. It starts to almost fizz and give you a rawer quality than you'd think it would ever deliver with that creamy, smooth, low-down power. It actually ends up getting quite addictive. and it makes you want to seek out that 7,200 RPM red line, even though, as I said before, you don't really need to make good progress. But it's nice to know that it's there, and it won't let you down if you really want to wring it out.
What doesn't need to grow on you, however, is just how stiff and tensed the latest M3 is. The part steel, part aluminium CLAR platform has been beefed up with braces to tie the front shock towers to each other and the bulkhead, elements to secure the stiffer front subframe to the reinforced engine bay, and underfloor shear panels. There's very little sign of compromise.
And you can tell that's the case as soon as you start this car up and set off, even at low speeds. Well, I'm not saying it's uncomfortable, it's far from it actually. It's a pretty good GT cruiser, but it's just the way that it goes down the road. You've got that super quick steering, the razor sharp nose that's always keen to turn in, even to little tight roundabouts, and also just the way that it handles bumps. It feels more like a mini DTM racing car than it ever has. I mean, they based this on the outgoing CS model, and well, it shows. It's got that focus about it. And of course, part of the reason for having that extra stiffness in the chassis is because of how much this car weighs. It's in excess of 1.7 tons, so it's never going to float from corner to corner like a Lotus Elise. But as I said in the 911 versus M4 video, BMW, along with a number of other manufacturers, have become masters at not hiding the weight in a car, but rather making the car work with it as best as possible. So you still haven't got the feel of something which weighs, 500 kilograms less, but what you do have is all the important points like the turn-in, the agility, the way that it punches out of corners, the adjustability, all of the good things that you want. They've still managed to carry it through in a way that doesn't really offer too much compromise. I mean, of course, on a lap it would be several seconds quicker if it was half a ton lighter, but on the road, driving it on normal, regular B roads, it's still an awful lot of fun, and the weight is never really at the front of your mind. And one of the biggest challenges with placing this car is just how wide it is on the road. But of course, that extra width at the front helps it dig into corners, and the amount of bite that you get from the front wheels, I mean, there's barely any understeer at all. You really have to go looking for it. And even though you've got that big lump up front, it still carves such a true line through every corner. And you barely have to give it any steering input either, because the rack, I mean, it's not nervous quite, but it's getting on the edge of it. You wouldn't want any more speed at all. And when it comes to exiting a corner, I mean, there's traction. You can feed the power in gently and just let the torque gently steer the rear end round, because there's torque, as I said, everywhere. You don't need to be in a low gear to do that. Or you can do it in a more M-car suited way, where you just give it a big boot full of power and it steers it around itself. Whichever way you want to do it, it's got you covered. It's nice of BMW to give you a choice coming through corners. You can take the fast, clean line, or you can take the not so fast but very, very fun way of doing things. And M-cars have always been brilliant at giving you that opportunity to just be a hooligan if you want to.
There's a real conviction to the way that the G80 M3 drives that may well make it the most rounded version ever. And yet, if you're going to spend £75,000 on a BMW M3, then why not get one like this?
If ever a car didn't need an introduction, it would be this. But just in case, it's the E46 BMW M3 CSL, and it is performance car royalty. Production started in 2003, and it's a limited run edition of the regular E46 M3, which was obviously a brilliant car in its own right. This was limited to less than 1,500 units worldwide, and less than 500 came to the UK. The big headline figures, well, it's lighter because CSL stands for Coupe, Sports and Lightweight, so it's 110 kilograms lighter than the regular car, which means it comes in at under 1,400 kilograms. And it's also got more power, 17 brake horsepower extra to take it up to 355. But honestly, those two figures only tell you a very small part of the story, because there are so many changes from this car to the regular M3. I mean, I've got a list here from the M3 Cutters Forum, so thank you very much to them. And honestly, look, I mean, it's going on to 1.5 pages. There's no way I was going to remember all this. So here I am with a paper list, and yeah, the engine block for a start, that's different. The engine head, the intake plenum, or the carbon airbox as we would call it, you can see it, it dominates as soon as you open the bonnet. And not only does it make the car sound louder and even better and really amplifies that fantastic straight six engine note, it of course also increases performance a little bit as well. There's a different ECU, but then this engine was already pretty highly strung in the first place, which is why the power gains aren't exactly that much, but still it makes it sharper and it does give a little bit more power. Steering ratio has been shortened, it's 14-15-1 compared to 15-14-1. The front bumper, noticeably different to the regular M3, it's made of carbon, and as you can see it's got that large intake hole just on the left hand side which feeds cold air into the engine, and I quite like how it's not symmetrical. Also carbon fibre is the roof. Now M cars now are synonymous with having carbon fibre roofs because of course it lowers the centre of gravity. But this was the first one that did it, the M3 E46 CSL. Round the back, the diffuser, also made of carbon fibre. The boot lid is made of moulded sheet plastic to make it lighter. The rear window is made of lighter glass, again to save weight. Also the suspension, it's different all round from the standard car, and it's got shorter springs and different damper and rebound rates. I can also mention things like there's only 4 airbags rather than 6, and that the sound deadening has been taken out, and the radio and the aircon are both optional. It's all there to make this car that much more driver focused. But I think the best thing to do now would be to, well, just go and drive it, really. Oh, this is exciting. I've driven a standard E46 M3 before, a few years back, but I've never driven the CSL model. And this is the one that you want. This is the one you dream about. And I've got to say, first impressions, the first time I got in this car, what struck me was just how simple and uncluttered and focused it is. You sit nice and low in this bucket seat, and although the driving position is a little bit offset, like it is in a lot of BMWs, it doesn't spoil the experience because it just feels like everything is there to help you drive the car and nothing else really. I mean, you've got the BMW Business CD, the radio, the optional radio, and the climate control buttons below, but they're just there to look elegant and help you out when you need them and not to distract you, like a modern day touchscreen, for example. And also the 4 BMW dials straight in front of your eyes. They're so elegant and clear. And this steering wheel as well, it's trimmed so nicely with the M colour stitching, and you've only got one button on the wheel, and that's to reduce the stability and the traction control. Everything here just makes you want to start the engine and drive it, which is exactly what I'm going to do if it stops beeping at me. Now, you know what? I'm going to start by addressing the elephant in the room, shall we say, and it's the SMG transmission, because this is a transmission that you have to get with the CSL. It wasn't built with a manual gearbox from the factory. The SMG was optional on the regular M3, but on the CSL, That's all you're getting. And it seems a bit strange because here's a car that's focused on driving, and yet they've taken away the option to have the most focused gearbox of them all, which is of course a good old-fashioned H-pattern manual with 3 pedals. And a lot of people absolutely hate this gearbox, and in a lot of ways I can see why, because driving around at normal speeds or around town like we're doing now, it's really not great. It rolls back and forwards on hills. It doesn't always respond how you want it to. It can leave you hanging at roundabouts, and that's because it's not a proper automatic gearbox, so you can't really expect it to do that. But what it does do well, and this is interesting how it links to the G80, what it does do well is when you're really pushing along and you're driving this car quickly, then it starts to make a bit more sense. When you pick up the speed, it automatically becomes so much more comfortable and happier with what it's doing. I mean, the up changes, they can be quite jerky if you don't time them right. The best thing to do, I've found, to get the smoothest up change is just come off the power a little bit, time it right, and then get back on again, and you get a much crisper up change. So 3rd gear now, just lift off a bit, 4th, back on the power, and it starts to make a bit more sense. Then down changes, coming into these corners, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, it blips beautifully on the down changes like an expert heel and tower would, and then you're off. There's the up change, down, 2nd, bit of a delay. It's not perfect. No way am I saying it's perfect, but I don't think it should be enough to spoil the whole car for you, because if you work with it, you can start to appreciate that it's got a character in a way that a lot of automatic gearboxes or paddle shift gearboxes really don't, because they're just so clinical and crisp. This isn't like that. You have to work with it, you have to do it on its terms, and it does have a character. Another way that the new and the old M3 differs, and I'm sure this one won't come as a surprise to you, but it's the engine. Because while they're both 3-litre straight 6s, that's about where the similarities end. The G80 has got such a flexible power unit that you can enjoy a nice flowing B-road in 3rd, 4th, 5th gear. You can just leave it in gear and power along at a cracking rate. In this, you need to use the gears, you need to get that gearbox working. And that's not because there's not really any power low down, it's still got a decent amount of shove. But trust me, you want this engine in its power band. And the reason for that is, well, have a listen. This is honestly one of the most staggeringly good engine sound you will ever hear in any car from any era. It is fantastic, it is unique, it is raw, it's everything you want it to be. I could just go up and down this road all day and enjoy it. And you know, I think it does its best work between about 3 and, let's see, 4,500, where you get that, almost that vibrating death rattle from the engine, and a lot of that is down to the carbon airbox, which just amplifies what is already a fantastic engine sound in the M3. I mean, just listen. There's something else. In a lot of cars that sound fantastic, you'll notice they rev really, really quickly, and they will often have short gear ratios. In this, the gear ratios are longer, and it's slower to rev, so you get to savor that sound through every gear. I mean, honestly, the best way to drive one of these things, if you ever get the chance, is, I'm sorry if this ruins the sound for you, but windows down, like that, foot down, I mean, that's driving heaven right there. And in all of this, actually, you forget that this is actually still a very quick car, 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds. And interestingly, it was restricted to 100 55 miles an hour from the factory, but if you presented a racing license, they would take the limiter off for you. I'll tell you what, coming into corners, this thing hasn't got half the trickery that the G80 has. It relies much more on it being lightweight and far more focused. And even then, even with that, this car is from 2003. And when I drove a CLK 63 Black in a previous video, the handling, well, it felt like it was from 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't as crisp or as sharp as a modern AMG, but this is just completely different. You would not know how old this car is. It still feels so sharp and intuitive coming through corners. The steering ratio, I said earlier how it was quickened up for the CSL, and it makes you wonder how slow is it in the E46, because it's nowhere near as sharp or as almost agitated as in the G80. And it's almost a little bit 911-like, because there's just a little bit of vagueness just off centre, like you get with Porsche 911s. But then once you go past that and you start to actually dial in some lock going into corners, it's so beautifully proportioned and weighted, and you do get feel from it. And whereas the G80 feels like it has a much more tensed up front end, which it has to because of the weight, this doesn't. It's far more flowing, and it feels like it leans more into corners and then delivers its grip in a more natural way. I mean, it does have its limitations. You can't pile into a corner with quite the same enthusiasm and speed, and you find yourself taking a line that lends you to getting a better exit, because you can get lazy in the G80 and just use the torque to pull yourself out, or indeed push the back round. In this, it's all about being smooth and working with the weight transfer on the chassis. But it's such a satisfying experience, and the reward for getting it right is hearing that engine note every time you come out of a corner. It's such good fun. Oh, what a car. Honestly, this thing's going in the dream garage. It's straight into the top 10. Oh, I could sit here and tell you about it all day, but it's probably time to wrap it up after a few more squirts, obviously. You know, I'm quite aware that I've listed a lot of differences between these two cars in this video, and of course there's always going to be differences, but there's one thing that brings both of these cars together. It's something that transcends engines, controversial gearboxes, questionable marketing campaigns, and some very bold styling decisions. And that is that you just know whoever made and whoever worked on the new M3, the G80, you're very aware that they would have almost certainly had a picture or even a model of this E46 M3 CSL in their office or on their desk. It would have been a dream car for them as well. It's not just us that still thinks about that car. They'll be thinking, how can I make this new M3 worthy of its ancestors? How can I carry on the line of M division engineers that have always made brilliant cars? And although these are both very different cars built for very different times, they're both bold, they're both fast, they're both focused, they're both exciting, they're fun, they're controversial and desirable in equal measure. But most importantly, they're both proper M cars. Except, of course, this one sounds just a little bit better.